Okay, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here on this symposium about symbolic number ordering. And I'm just gonna hand it over straight away to Bert Reynvoet.
Okay, thank you, Ilse. Indeed, welcome everybody on this symposium. Together with Francesco, Sella, we set up a list of, I think, four very nice and interesting talks. I will keep it very short myself, not to steal, and in order not to steal the time of the presenters and give them as much time as possible. The only function that I will do and the remainder of this symposium is playing the role of a timekeeper. So to the presenters, they know it already, but if we enter into the end of the talk, so around 10 to 12 minutes, I will give a sign so that you know that it is about time to finish the presentation. The first presenter of today is Lucie Attout from the University of Liège in Belgium, and she will talk about the representation of ordinal information, domain-specific or domain-general. Lucie, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and you can take over. Good luck.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me for this exciting symposium. So today I will talk to you about ordinal information, and the question is if it's domain specific or domain general. So ordinal processes are required to process the sequential relations between stimuli of a stimulus set. So just for, yes, the pointer, okay. So for example, 4 is after 3 and before 5 in the numerical sequence. So it belongs to the numerical sequence. And this ordinal processes seems to be required to process any kind of sequential information, such as the numerical, but also alphabetical, days of the week or months of the year sequences. And it's important to underline that even if numerous studies focused on the differences or the commonalities between the different ordinal representation, the nature and the mechanism of this process remain still unclear. And here we try to use a neuroimaging approach to bring some new insights about it. So this kind of process, the ordinal process, leads to the numerical order processes, lead to a well-known effect, the distance effect. For example, so to judge a river, which is the largest among two numbers, we are faster and make less errors when the two numbers come from further distances rather than close. So this is what we call the standard distance effect. However, when we have to judge the order of two numbers, we usually observe the reverse pattern with faster and make less error when the two numbers come from close distances. And this is especially true for judging triplets of numbers. So this is what we call the reverse distance effect or the ordinal distance effect. And this effect has been considered as the behavioral signature of ordinal processes and a consequence of how numerical order is represented in memory. Also, at the brain level, several studies have demonstrated a neural sensitivity to the distance effect at the IPS level, so the intraparietal sulcus. Other studies have also found a sensitivity to the distance effect when we process different ordinal information, such as letters, but also different size of shapes or different brightnesses in the IPS, but also at the frontal level. And in another domain, the working memory domain, previous studies have also found a standard distance effect characterized by faster response time to judge two memoranda distant rather than close serial positions in the memory list. So to give you a clear example, here in the memory sequence A, B, C, D, E, the letters A and D is judged faster and more accurately than the order of B and D. And they also found a sensitivity to this working memory distance effect in the IPS too. And finally, in a previous study that we conducted, comparing ordinal judgment across 3 domains, we had already observed a parametric modulation of the IPS by working memory, alphabetical and numerical distance effect. However, even if numerous previous studies seems to support the existence of common neural mechanisms to process ordinal information, there is currently still no direct evidence, and this mainly for 2 reasons. So first, showing activity in similar brain networks doesn't necessarily mean that the same information is processed in these networks across tasks and domains. So for example, multivariate pattern analysis assessing the informational content of neural activity have led to contradictory evidence regarding the existence of domain general codes. And second, with another paradigm, an implicit adaptation task based on the habituation paradigm principle, a recent study demonstrated different brain networks for numerical and alphabetical distance effects. So it's not so clear until now. So in this study, we assessed the hypothesis of domain general codes for the representation of ordinal information across 3 domains, working memory, numerical and alphabetical domains, by assessing the neural similarity of voxel activity patterns by using MVPA technique to assess directly the similarity of voxel involved in the different ordinal distance effect, but also we use triplets, which have been shown as leading to a more robust ordinal distance effect. So to explore this question, we assessed 4 different tasks in a 3T scanner to a group of young healthy adults. And first, to assess the ordinal processing in working memory, we use an usual order working memory judgment task where after the presentation of a 6-letter list to memorize and a variable delay, the participant had to judge if 3 letters were in the same order or not than in the memory list. And we manipulated the distance between the letters to judge with a distance of 1 for adjacent letters, as you can see here, E, F, C, or the distance of 2 for letters distance from 2 positions in the memory list, like here, B, E, C. So that's it. For the alphabetical order judgment task, we simply asked the participant if 3 letters were in the correct alphabetical order or not. And again, we manipulated the distance between the letters with consecutive letters or letters distant from 2 letters in the alphabetical sequence. To assess numerical order, we used the same kind of task, but with numbers. And finally, we also use a luminous judgment task to check for the difficulty level by asking the participant to judge if 3 squares had the same level of luminance or not. And we manipulated the difficulty with very close level of luminance or more distinct ones. To analyze the results, we focus on some regions of interest, including the IPS, anterior and posterior parts, the middle and the inferior frontal gyrus, usually involved in ordinal processes, and also the hippocampus, given that some studies also suggest a role of this region in short-term sequential processes. And finally, we included an occipital area as a control area. Let's turn to the results. At behavioral level, we observe the main effect of task with faster response time for the numerical and the luminance judgment task in comparison to the working memory and alphabetical tasks. And more interestingly, we observed an interaction effect demonstrating moderate to strong evidence for an ordinal distance effect in all other judgment tasks, even if it was less obvious for the numerical one, with faster response time for consecutive adjacent stimuli than distant ones, and a standard distance effect in the luminance judgment task with response time, with faster response time for more distant, more different level of luminance. For the fMRI results, we first checked the univariate and the univariate level, and we observed, as in previous studies, a sensitivity to the distance at the IPS level for all ordinal judgment tasks. We've also, so in the IPS, but also at the frontal level for the numerical ordinal judgment task. At multivariate level, we first examined the classification between the two distance, or the distance 1 and the distance 2, in each task separately for the different arrays. And Bayesian one sample t-test showed higher than chance level classification for all tasks at the parietal level and at frontal level, but also at the occipital level, but not at the hippocampal level. And also it's important to note that numerical and luminance tasks only classify higher than chance level for posterior IPS and the inferior frontal gyrus. A more interesting analysis to answer to our original question is the prediction between one task to another. So the idea here is to see if the classification between the two distances, distance 1 and distance 2 in one task, could predict the classification between these two distances in another task. And we observed a robust prediction between alphabetical and working memory tasks in both ways at the right posterior IPS level and the inferior and middle frontal gyrus level. But very interestingly, no prediction at all with the numerical order task was observed. And this prediction wasn't found in other areas, such as occipital or hippocampal level. So it seems very specific. And finally, and interestingly too, when we check for the prediction with the luminance task or control task, we also observed the prediction with working memory and alphabetical task at frontal level, suggesting that this frontal involvement couldn't be so specific to this process, but probably more general. To sum up, both univariate and multivariate analysis showed a sensitivity to ordinal distance in frontoparietal cortices, but not at the hippocampus level. And critically, between domain prediction of ordinal distance was only reliable between the serial order working memory and the alphabetical task at the parietal and frontal level. And also, we observed evidence for between task prediction of distance between luminance task and working memory and alphabetical judgment task in frontal areas. So now our results are in favor of a domain general involvement of frontoparietal cortices, but doesn't support the hypothesis of domain general ordinal cords per se. First, because the prediction of ordinal distance was only observed for the order working memory and alphabetical tasks, but not for the numerical domain. And the prediction wasn't specific to ordinal distance, since luminance distance could also be predicted from ordinal distance in the working memory and alphabetical judgment task. So it seems to be more like a nerd versus easy dimension with different levels of attentional control rather than an ordinal dimension per se. And another interesting result is that the posterior IPS didn't allow for prediction between luminance and ordinal distance. So it seems to have a more specific role for ordinal distance. And an interesting assumption could be that this region would have a spatial attentional role, since previous studies have found different neural signal for left-right versus right-right attention. And this also fits with a recent assumption, the mental-Weibert hypothesis, suggesting that an attentional spatial frame could allow to temporarily organize memoranda and letters on an horizontal line ordered from left to right in our culture. So to conclude, our study demonstrated domain-interval involvement of frontoparietal network, but this network appears to reflect probably the differential involvement of top-down and spatial attentional resources rather than domain-general coding of ordinal representation. Okay. Thank you for your attention. Do you have
Thank you, Lucie. Maybe there is time for one short question.
I have one if nobody jumps in. Thanks, Lucie, for the presentation. It was great. I really like the task that you use. I have a brief question and then a follow-up. Is the interval, the numerical interval that you use, I would assume is from 1 to 9? And yes. the letters probably was from A to I?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The same range, yes.
Yes. You mentioned like this hard versus easy kind of hypothesis. And what I thought is like with numbers, judging, for instance, I don't know if 7, 8, 9 is in order or not, is quite simple, even though we know that judging 1, 2, 3, it's easier. But with the letters, for instance, ABC, it's pretty straightforward, right? But as soon as, for instance, if you ask someone to judge whether, I don't know, like for instance, and then it's something that I wrote down because I can't do that directly from my memory. You see what I mean? Like if for instance, if you ask someone to judge whether, I don't know, E, G, and I are in order, probably, you see what I mean? Probably that's the reason why you have this kind of correlation between working memory and alphabetic order, because at a certain point, apart from ABC, I would say, it gets much more complex. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the idea that why we observe that, probably that in the numerical sequence, participants just remember directly the solution and judge directly, but probably that in working memory, because they don't know the sequence, and it's probably the same in the alphabetical sequence, they need to check and to scan the sequence. So I think that's the point, yeah. But probably that in children, we don't find the same results because the numerical sequence is not also automatic or so, yeah, so.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, to stick to the time schedule, I suggest we move to the second presenter, which is who is Natalia Dubinkina from the KU Leuven, and she will talk about underlying strategies in symbolic ordering that are examined through self-reports. Natalia, you can share your screen.
Yeah, can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes, that's okay.
That's great. So I'm sharing my screen. Is it working?
Yep, it's working.
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I will talk about symbolic number order processing, its underlying mechanisms, and its relation to arithmetic fluency in adults. So depending on the context, symbolic numbers can convey different meanings. They can, first of all, refer to their magnitudes and to the specific value. But as it already has been mentioned today, they can contain positional information within the sequence. So for example, 3 goes after 1, and it also goes before 5. And this aspect of numerical processing is called ordinality, and it receives large attention in the community during the recent years. Typically, in the experimental context, ordinality is measured with so-called symbolic ordering task, or order verification task, as it's sometimes called, when the participants are presented with the triplets of symbolic digits, and they need to indicate as fast as possible whether it is arranged in correct order or not in correct order. This is also an influential line of the research, because performance on this task is shown to be related to math abilities both in adults and in children, and both cross-sectionally and longitudinally. But underlying mechanisms of symbolic ordering processing is not really well understood, and it's still not clear which core competence it is actually measured. This task can have different parameters, and the presented triplet can have different features and can be grouped differently. So one of the most important parameters are direction and the distance between digits. So direction can be basically ascending, examples marked in red, descending, or non-ordered. And the distance can be, it can be different. And in our study, it was either small, consecutive one, so they go one after another, or it was a non-consecutive distance, like 1, 3, 5, for example, or 5, 3, 1. And it was either 2 or 3 or 4, the distance between 2 neighboring digits. So altogether, they are resulted in 6 different conditions. Why these particular parameters are important? Because they lead to particular behavioral signatures, as it was discussed already today. There are 2 distinct relationships that can be observed systematically in this task. It's a so-called classical distance effect, which is also present in the magnitude comparison task, and which is thought to be a signature of magnitude comparison, and so-called reverse distance effect, which is specific only to symbolic number ordering and which is less stable across different sessions. So these 2 signatures, they lead to some speculations on their possible solution strategies that underline their order judgment process. And some suggestions have been made that for order trials, mainly associations from the long-term memory are used, and participants probably retrieve it from the memory. And at the same time, for non-ordered trials, such as, for example, 716 or 534, magnitude comparison or magnitude-based mechanism is involved. So the main question is, how could we check these assumptions, and which methodology will allow us to explain these behavioral signatures? Basically, we had 2 main questions: how possible strategies are distributed among different conditions. Remember, we had 6 conditions in total, and how these applied strategies can be related to their proficiency in arithmetic, since performance on this task is strongly related to their arithmetic fluency in adults as well. So for this, we modified the task a little bit. We decided to use self-repeated strategy methodology, and basically asked participants how did they think they solved each particular trial. this methodology is in general widely employed in educational sciences and in some mental math arithmetic tasks. But unlike math operations, this ordering task, it's not very common. It's not introduced in schools as a part of their curriculum. So first of all, we needed to identify particular groups of strategies that in principle can be applied here. So we first undertook an exploratory step to identify the most common strategy groups when participants needed to identify in a written form which strategy did they use to arrive to the right conclusion. And based on their free reports, we identified 4 main categories of strategies: memory, decomposition, arithmetic, and the group other for those strategies that didn't fit any of these categories. So memory is basically retrieval, when they remember or don't remember the sequence and arrive to the conclusion based on the memory traces. Decomposition, which is magnitude-based thing when they compare different magnitudes between each other. It can be the first item to the second to the third, or the other way around, it doesn't matter, but they need to decompose the sequence. Or arithmetic, when they apply some additional arithmetic operations to make tasks look easier for them. And strategies other that don't really match above mentioned categories. So after this exploratory step, we had the main experimental session when we presented subjects with triplets that varied in direction and the distance. And they needed to report all the time after each triplet which strategy they used, which group of strategy they used. So they had this choice menu available, and they needed to identify which group of strategies was used to solve this specific trial. And math proficiency was measured with the timed test. Which is probably familiar for many of you. This is how it looks like. The results, first of all, strategy distribution, how they are distributed across the session. The most common strategy was memory, it's 45%, and the second common strategy was decomposition, 40%, which is expected. And arithmetic also was used in 10% of cases, a little bit less, but it was still in use. And this graph demonstrates the distribution of the strategies across different conditions. So the left panel is consecutive trials with a small distance. The right panel is non-consecutive trials with bigger distances. And here are their directions. And as you can see here easily from this graph, for ascending direction, memory was used. Memory is marked in pinkish. It was used more often, much more often than for non-ordered trials. And for non-ordered trials, decomposition was the most popular choice, which is more or less in line with our predictions and some previous speculations on possible mechanisms that are involved in triplet judgments. We also looked into reaction time effects to see whether this experiment replicates this behavioral signature, and we did find reversed effect for ascending trials, the reverse distance effect. For non-ordered trials, it was a right direction, but it wasn't significant, probably due to the little amounts of trials or to the modified methodology that we applied. And talking about TTR scores, as expected, reaction time across all the conditions, they were negatively correlated with the TTR scores, but the proportion of memory-based strategy was not correlated to the TTR scores. So it brings us to the point that probably higher achievers, they use the same amount of memory retrieval strategy as people who are not that fluent in math. However, what is interesting, and I find it personally an interesting finding, that their speeds of their memory retrieval of the trials that were solved with memory is higher for people who are better in math, but we didn't find this in decomposition strategies. So basically, yeah, what we can conclude from these results is that strategy repertoire as such is not moderated by proficiency level in arithmetic and basic numerical skills, but people who are better in math and not that good in math, they are different with respect to the speeds of the memory retrieval strategies. So higher achievers are more capable to retrieve sequences from memory, and they do it faster, even though as often as their counterparts. So this is it. Yeah, if someone have questions, I would be happy to answer.
Okay, Natalia, thank you. Nicely on time. We do have indeed some time for questions. I don't see everybody.
I think Bert de Smet has a
okay,
question.
now I see it too. Yes. Bert, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Natalia, for the nice presentation. I have a question on the strategy assessment. In arithmetic, we usually compare the efficiency of the strategies. That is also a way to kind of check for reliability, because you could assume that, or at least in arithmetic, the assumption is that memory retrieval should be the fastest. So I wondered whether you have been able to look at that data and to do some kind of checks of reliability. And it's particularly important, I think, because the process you're looking at is much faster than we are used to in arithmetic. So it might not be so easy to detect strategies.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Indeed, it's harder for participants to determine which strategies they used under this pressure. But what we found that when they use memory, they are generally faster. So memory retrieval is faster than non-memory. This is an evidence that probably indeed when they recognize the sequence, they don't need any other steps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't immediately see other questions. Then I think it's also keeping in mind the time a little bit. Thank you, Natalia, again, and we can go on with our next presenter. Natalia, I don't know what I'm seeing here now. I don't know whose screen it is, but in any case, the next presenter is Stephanie Bugden, and she will talk about producing and verifying ordered sequences of numerals and provide evidence that they tap into distinct cognitive processes. Stephanie, is it
okay?
working?
Can you see my slides and hear me okay?
No, I see
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Yes, okay, then I did something wrong.
Wait. No or yes?
So probably it's just me, but the quality, the resolution of the slides is very low.
Yeah, I do see them now. It's okay. But indeed, it's right what Francesco was saying that
Well, yeah.
now we don't see it the entire slide anymore, I guess. This is better, yeah.
Now it's better, yeah.
Better?
Yes.
But it's not, the resolution's not terrible?
No, this is
Okay.
perfectly readable. That's no problem.
I've been living out of a suitcase for the last couple of months. So I'm in the process of setting up home work office. So I have limited access to my technology. So I'm a very small laptop. Okay, so I have basically the same introduction as everybody else does. So I'm going to try to speed through it. And today I'm excited about presenting. This is very preliminary data, so I'm really intrigued by what people's thoughts are and maybe future discussion. I'm still analyzing the data, so hopefully what I present today is interesting from the amount that I have. The field has largely focused on understanding children's development of symbolic magnitude associations, and that symbols refer to quantities or specific magnitudes. But as we all know, numbers also represent ordinal positions in a rank or a sequence. And, there's a growing body of work that's exploring the development of ordinal sequencing skills, the relationship between ordinal sequencing and magnitude processing, and their unique roles in developing more complex math skills. I'm going to quickly go through this, but magnitude processing is typically assessed with number comparison tasks. And we see that response times and error rates decrease as the distance increase. But in contrast, for ordinal processing, we see that in an order verification task where adults and children are asked to verify if an ordered sequence is in the correct order or not, we see the opposite. So response times and error rates increase as the distance also increases. And so we find that canonical and reverse distance effects are unrelated, but both account for unique variance in math performance in adults. And the fact that we see these different patterns of behavior suggests that these are distinct cognitive mechanisms. And we see these distinct findings in tasks that are intended to assess different types of numerical representations. But it remains unclear under what conditions a reverse distance effect emerges. And so we've seen mixed findings as to whether we see a reverse distance effect with triplets or with pairs. So depending on the type of ordinal context, might produce different behavioral responses. So the overarching goal of my study is to examine whether two different ordering tasks, so a verification and production task, share similar or distinct cognitive mechanisms in both adults and children. And so first, I examined whether there are differences. I see some chats, but I just want to make sure that nothing's wrong with my presentation. Is anyone else can see the chat to make sure?
No, I think it's fine.
All is fine.
Thanks. Yeah, maybe interrupt me if there's anything. So first we examine whether there are differences in behavior when both adults and children are presented with three numerals and asked to produce the sequence rather than verify if the sequence is in the correct ascending or descending sequence. So does verifying and producing ordinal sequence elicit reverse or canonical distance effects? And we have found that order verification tasks can be quite challenging for young children in early elementary school and preschool years. And in particular, we find that around chance level performance on sequences that are farther apart in distance. So one potential reason why young children find it difficult is that it requires that they first determine if a sequence is in the correct order or not. And then they have to map that response to an arbitrary yes or no response. But another possibility is that they don't understand or have a concept of what the right order means, which could be related to the instructions of the verification task. So a second goal of the study was to determine whether there were differences in task performance across the verification and production tasks, specifically in the young children, and whether performance on the production task can account for knowledge that the verification doesn't in young children. And lastly, we explored whether both tasks accounted for unique variance in math performance in children. So these figures are for illustrative purposes, but this is typically what the screen looks like. So the production task was modeled or inspired by the simultaneous chaining paradigms that has been used to study sequence learning in animals and humans. But each trial is initiated by touching the dinosaur in the middle of the screen. And participants are instructed to touch the numbers in order from smallest to biggest. So participants were given an example and practice trial, so they understood that they could press the numbers in any given direction. And we recorded response times and accuracy for each touch. So you can see that specifically in the child task, that the numbers, once they touched the number, changed color and made a sound, so they could remember which ones they pressed. All possible sequences were administered in all possible directions. We also used the triangle here to ensure that there was equidistance among all three numbers. So any differences in response times for each press was not associated with the physical distance of those numbers on the screen. The order verification was based off of the classic paradigms that have been published in numerous papers by Ian Lyons. And the same tasks were given to both adults and children in this study, although we administered substantially less trials for children. And so the hypothesis is that if the associative strength between numbers would decrease as the distance between them increases, then we would expect the reverse distance effects, such that sequences with a distance of 1, or I'm going to call them the countless sequences, would elicit faster response times than sequences that are further apart in distance. Or otherwise, I'm going to call them non-countless sequences. So we'd expect similar patterns of results for both production and verification tasks. However, if the production task activates analog magnitudes, we might expect canonical distance effects. I do want to note that participants did complete the mixed or not in order trials and the order verification task, but I'm going to focus less on those trials today. And participants did complete other tasks, but I don't have time to discuss those findings, as I wanted to focus more on the child data. So first, I tested whether our touchscreen version of the order verification task replicated previous findings and elicited a reverse distance effect. And we did. So we do see in the red box there, we do see that mean reaction times increase as the distance increases. And it's specifically driven by the difference between distance 1 and 2 and 1 and 3. I just wanted to note that there is a substantially large standard error here. I did have a couple of participants who were outliers who had a median reaction time that was quite large, but this effect remains the same when you take those two participants out. However, unlike the order verification task, and contrary to what I initially hypothesized, we did find a significant canonical distance effect in the ordinal production task. So you can see it's quite large, that mean reaction times are substantially longer for distances 1 relative to 2 and 3. And what's interesting is that the canonical distance effect here is driven by the first touch. So adults plan in advance their sequence before they're initiating their first response. There's no evidence that the second comparison, for example, is made once they select the numerically smaller number amongst the 3 numerals. So this is the response time on the right. You can see that these are the responses for the first stimulus touch. So one question that I did have was, in the order production task, responses can go in various different directions, right? So you can start with the top. As you can see here, press the 4 to the left and the 7 to the right. And this could be counterintuitive to the way in which ordinal representations or ordinal sequences are represented. So I specifically selected numbers that were presented in order from left to right. So these are all touches from the left position to the right position. And I just tested whether we still see canonical distance effects, even with the benefit of having the numbers in spatially ordered left to right sequence. And we still see a very strong and robust canonical distance effect. So even when numbers are presented in order from left to right spatially, we still see robust canonical distance effects. So response times are longer when the distance between the numerals are small relative to further apart. So just quickly, the adult data I presented here is a pre-registered replication of the initial results. So across both the studies, we do find that verification tasks produce reverse distance effects while the production task elicits canonical distance effects. And so these findings might suggest that the order production task taps into distinct cognitive processes. I did not find significant differences in accuracy between the tasks or in the response times for the first response in the order production task. And in fact, participants were quicker at making a first response in the order production relative to the verification task. So to me, that suggests they're not performing the iterative comparisons as they go, but it's possible, but it does suggest that they are activating analog magnitude. So they might be tapping into their symbol magnitude associations, whereas the reverse distance effect for the in-ordered sequences suggests that it's tapping into the strength of associations amongst those symbols. We also followed up with, in our second study, we followed up with very young kids. So we collected data from the production and verification task in 82 kids between 4 to 7 years of age. So this is a diverse sample that was tested across local preschools in Philadelphia area. So many of these preschools are from low-income neighborhoods, and that kids that were in school were tested in their after-school programs. So it was a combination of preschool and daycare during the day, and then kids would go to school during the school hours. Participants were excluded if they couldn't correctly identify their numerals 1 to 9 to ensure that they could actually do the tasks. We also excluded kids that were at chance across both the verification and production tasks. So our samples left there with 54 kids. And the participants also completed the numeration subtest, the key math. So this is a standardized assessment of general numerical knowledge. We collected counting performance using David Barner's initial, like how high can you count task. So children are asked to count as high as they could. And their counting performance is indicated by the highest number they could count to without making any errors. And then we also collected nonverbal IQ from the matrix reasoning subtest from the Wechsler preschool scales. So we first explored the pattern of responses for the order production task. So much like adults, do we see kids demonstrating a canonical distance effect? And unlike the robust effects we found in adults, we did fail to find any significant distance effects. As you can see in the plot, there's quite a bit of variability here. This is the proportion of correct, so this is their accuracy, and the dotted line is chance performance on this task. We did not find any distance effects in reaction time either, and there's no interaction between age and distance. So at least within the sample of kids, we don't see that a distance effect becomes larger in our older kids.
Stephanie, sorry to interrupt you, but we are approaching the 15 minutes. So
perfect. Okay.
Mentioning.
Much like the adults, we do see a reverse distance effect here, where in the in-order trials, we see higher accuracy relative to the non-count list trials. And the performance on the non-count list trials is hovering just above chance. So this is consistent with the results from Gilmore and Batchelor that was just published in the spring. So you can see here in the table on the right, they just published where they do find that performance is at chance. And although the performance in this task is above chance in our particular study, we do see very similar performance profiles. And it's characterized by a bimodal distribution where you either have children that are performing either below chance or above chance. So it's they get that the non-count list sequences are in order, or they don't get it at all. So they're indicating for the majority of the time that those numbers are not in the correct ascending order. And on the right is the data from our particular study. So there are two questions that arise from this plot. One is whether verification task is tapping into true ordinal knowledge in young children, or if there's something about this task for some kids, the instructions or the language used is not clicking for them. So in other words, is there something about the context that kids are not able to apply what they really know in the order verification task? And the next question is, does it really matter? So if children are not grasping what order means in the particular context of the verification task, such that the right order extends to sequences that are outside their immediate count list, is it important for us to indicate that how children represent the ordinal sequences? And does that predict individual differences in math performance? So just really quickly, these are the kids that, so 30% of the kids could not perform the far distance trials above chance. So you can see on the left that the kids are, far below chance, where they're indicating that the non-countless sequences are indeed not in order, even though they are. However, they are able to produce those sequences in the correct ascending order. And that's on the right-hand side. So you can see that the performance is much higher on the production task, despite the fact that in the verification, they're indicating that those numbers are not in the same order. And second, does that performance on the task, specifically the non-countless items, account for unique variance in math performance? And if we run a regression analysis where we put order production and we split the verification task based on the countless trials and non-countless trials while controlling for age, counting ability, and nonverbal IQ, we find that both performance on the production task and the non-countless trials on the verification task account for unique variance, even when we count for counting ability and matrix reasoning. And so this result is in contrast to what Gilmore and Batchelor found, where they found that counting performance was a significant unique predictor of math performance. And that could be attributed to different ways in which we assess counting knowledge. Together, we failed, in contrast to adults, we failed to find significant distance effect in the production task in children. However, we did find a significant reverse distance effect for the in-ordered sequences in the verification task. And although we see trends for canonical distance effect in the production tasks, together with the reverse distance effect found in the verification, it corroborates the adult findings. So it supports that there are distinct cognitive mechanisms associated with producing and verifying sequences. And we did find a subgroup of children that failed to identify non-countless sequences. So these are sequences like 2, 4, 6 as the correct order. But with the same numerals, they could correctly produce an ordered sequence. So in general, they performed higher on the production task than the verification task. That suggests that the production task could be allowing kids to compensate for not having, say, a precise ordinal representation. But interestingly, both performance on both tasks account for unique variance in general numerical skills. So these have important implications for interventions in terms of focusing potentially on the magnitude associations in order to build the symbol associations, and also important implications for identifying kids that might be at risk for developing math disabilities. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Maybe time for one short question while we have to switch from screen to screen towards Kinga's screen, who is the last presenter. Ian, you have a question, I see.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks, Bert. And a really, really interesting work, Stephanie. It's really fascinating stuff. The question I have is sort of going back to some of Brian Butterworth's old work, where he looked at arithmetic, right? So simple arithmetic, especially addition in children. And there he found that one of the key strategies was that they would identify the larger number and then count on from that number, right? So 6 plus 2, they would identify first that 6 is the larger number, then they go 7, 8. And this accounted for a lot of variance, especially in younger kids. So in your verification task, if you've got some sort of identify min kind of process that's happening, which of course would likely operate via some form of kind of magnitude comparison, and if that might be contributing to some of what you're seeing.
In the production or the verification? So
I'm sorry, in the production.
If like kids are identifying the smaller one and they're counting up?
Yeah. Sorry, not counting up, but just more, because you sort of said that the first key press or the first sort of response was sort of driving a lot of the effects. And so it made me think that maybe there's some sort of a find the smallest one and then go from there. Kind of in that it's a comparison, then that would of course predict some form of canonical distance effect.
Yes, I think that is possible and a likely mechanism for what's happening. It's happening really fast though. So even, I mean, the response time in that first press is significantly less than a response in the verification task, and in the in-ordered sequences. So if there is a counting up strategy, I think it's happening faster. I think, but I'm not able to assess that in the kids. It's very likely that I might see a different result in the kids, whereas the adults might be activating the smaller and sort of the growing sequence in a more rapid way than the kids might be. I don't have enough trials to analyze it specifically in the kids, whether they're counting. But I'm not sure that answered your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. And really, really cool data, by the way.
Thanks.
Okay, Stephanie, thanks again. I suggest we shift to the last presenter of today, who is Kinga Morsanyi from Loughborough. Kinga, feel free to take over the screen, I would say.
Yeah, can you see my slides? Yeah. No.
No.
No, we can't.
Okay, sorry. Right. Okay, so what do I do? And can you see my slides now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so thanks very much, Bert and Francesco, for organizing this very interesting session. So I'm going to talk about a training study with young children where we looked at how training in ordinality might help them to develop their formal mathematical skills. Okay, so I guess those of you who are here, you are quite aware that both numerical and also non-numerical ordering skills seem to play an important role in the development of math skills. So I say seem to play an important role because, of course, almost all studies in this field are cross-sectional correlational studies, and there are very few examples of longitudinal studies and even fewer intervention studies. So in fact, I'm only aware of one published intervention study, which is by Shu and Lefebvre, where they trained 3 to 5 year old children in sequential relations between numbers. So basically, they asked children about the numbers between 1 and 9, what number comes before and after each number. And so they had a single training session, and they found that so after this training, children improved not just in a number ordering task, but also on a number line task. So there was some indication that this training effect transferred across different types of mathematics performance. So we talked mostly about the number ordering tasks so far, and although there was some mention of ordering in other domains as well. So for example, I show you this daily event ordering task. So you know that you can ask adults to make judgments about the months of the year, for example. So you can have other types of temporal ordering tasks as well, but young children are not yet able to, they don't have a full representation of the months of the year, but this is a kind of task that they can actually do from quite a young age. So 4 and 5 year olds can already make a judgment about whether familiar events of the day, such as here, waking up, getting dressed, and doing your homework, are in a correct or incorrect order. And so this way you can create an analogous task to the standard number ordering tasks. So you can even create a 9-item sequence and just select items from this sequence for your task. And so what we found in a previous study in O'Connor and colleagues 2018 was that this task was actually very highly predictive of young children's mathematics development. So when we administered this task at the start of the first year of primary school, then this was actually the strongest predictor of children's mathematics performance at the end of the first and second school year. And even when we compared it and when we controlled for the effect of intelligence, and although when we contrasted this with a wide range of numerical and non-numerical tasks which are relevant to maths development. So it seems that this version of the task captures something which is quite important for early formal maths development. And then, of course, you are aware of probably Majerus and colleagues' order working memory task as well, where you present items to children or adults, and they have to recall or indicate the correct order of the items. So basically how it differs from a standard working memory task is basically that in this case you present the items to the participants and they just have to indicate the correct order. They don't have to recall the item itself. And so what I can say is that there's good evidence from studies both with adults and children that the first two tasks tap into similar processes, whereas the last task is kind of dissociated, although both of these types of tasks relate quite strongly to maths performance, both in children and adults. So the main difference really is that in the first two tasks, you are asking people to recall sequences or ordinal information from long-term memory, whereas in the last task, it's a sequence that they were just presented with. Okay, so the main aim of the study was, of course, to see whether order processing skills play a causal role in early mathematics development. And so we wanted to make a comparison between training in these three types of tasks. And I just wanted to say in advance, we didn't actually expect that working memory training would generalize to maths ability, because there's quite a large literature now showing that working memory training doesn't really generalize to other skills, but we just included this condition just for the sake of completeness, so that we have a good coverage of potentially relevant tasks. And then I guess what we were more interested in, whether non-numerical or numerical order training would be more beneficial, especially in the first year of primary school. And this study was run in Northern Ireland. So in Northern Ireland, children start school at a very young age, between the age of 4 and 5. So of course you could say, well, number ordering should be more relevant because this is a domain specific training, but based on the previous study where we found that non-numerical ordering was actually a stronger predictor of maths performance at the start of primary school, you could also think that maybe that's actually the better or more interesting skill to train. Yeah, so what we did before we ran this study, we had a small pilot study with 13 children from a primary school, just to, for example, to make a decision about how many training sessions would be the most appropriate, so that children still improve their skills but don't get too bored with this training procedure. And also we pre-tested and also asked the teachers to check the content of the maths performance measures, just to be sure that we are covering content that they already covered in school. And also we pre-tested the maths anxiety measure, which was successfully used before with 6-7-year-old children, but not with 4 or 5-year-olds. And of course, using a self-report measure with very young children, it's a bit problematic. But anyway, we found that the maths measure it had really good reliability both at pre and at post test, and the maths anxiety measure also had at least acceptable reliability both at pre and post test. So we had 50 children participating in the study between 4 and 5 years of age. So for the first year of primary school in Northern Ireland, and they were coming from 4 different classes in the same school, and each class was assigned a different training program. So this is basically the study design, that we had a pre-test session where we assessed children's maths performance and maths anxiety. Then each class participated in the 6 training sessions where they worked through 60 trials of the task that they were trained on. And then there was a post-test where they were again tested on their maths performance and maths anxiety. And we also had, in addition to the 3 training conditions, we had an active control condition where children they were performing a listening comprehension exercise. And in this case, they were presented with a different story each time, and they had to answer some questions about the story. So in this case, we didn't expect them to actually develop a new skill because it was a new task. Each time it was more just to have some kind of activity with them for the same amount of time. And the study was conducted between late March and early April during the first year of children's primary school education. So first, just to show that actually the training was successful for all tasks. So the largest training effects were found for the order working memory and number ordering training conditions. And I guess I should just refer back to what Stephanie was saying, that actually children particularly improved in their ability to recognize sequences like such as 2, 5, and 8, where there's there are kind of gaps in between the numbers, that these are still correct in order sequences. So they especially improved on trials with larger distances between the numerals. And there was also a significant training effect on daily event ordering, although it was not as large as in the other 2 conditions. Okay, so the main question was, of course, does the training effect generalize to maths performance? And so first, if you just have a look at the control, so you see here pre-test and post-test maths performance in each condition. So what happened in the control condition? You see no training effect at all, and yeah. So okay. So I start by saying when we run an ANOVA to compare training effects across all conditions, we had the main effect of time. So basically, after the training, children performed better on the maths test than before. There was a main effect of training condition, which showed that children in the number ordering condition overall, so across the 2 testing sessions, performed better at maths than in the control group. And there was a significant interaction between time and training conditions. So it showed that the training effect was different across the different training conditions. And when we actually contrast each main training condition with the control condition, so there was no evidence of any difference in training effects between the working memory and the control condition. For the daily events training, there was a significant interaction. So this indicated that the training effect was larger in the daily events ordering condition than in the control condition. And for number ordering, we also found an interaction, but this was only marginally significant. So you see a very similar trend in the number ordering condition to the daily events ordering condition, but this is a non-significant trend. And I should say that unfortunately in this, so we had the smallest sample size in this class. We only had 10 children, and we started with 11, but one child was excluded because he had a learning difficulty, so he didn't actually complete. So unfortunately, this was actually the smallest group that participated in the training. And we also checked for transfer effects to maths, anxiety, and although the effects are not significant, you see at least some indication of a trend in the number ordering condition that maybe maths anxiety was a little bit reduced. So I guess this also suggests that it would be really nice to repeat this training and with a larger number of participants and see if the number ordering training actually could be useful. Okay, so what we can say based on this study, although yeah, it's really a weakness of this study that we had a relatively quite a low sample size in the training group, that we had a significant effect and quite clear large effect in the non-numerical or daily events ordering condition. So we can say that actually there's evidence that it has a causal role in the early development of formal math skills. And although it's kind of counterintuitive that this domain general training or non-numerical training would be better than a numerical training, because this finding kind of replicates O'Connor and colleagues' finding. It's probably it can be accepted more easily as a meaningful result. And also because at this young age, so between 4 and 5 years of age, children still struggle a little bit with the number ordering task, I would say. So it could be an explanation maybe that this task could serve like this ability to represent the order of familiar items or familiar sequences could be some kind of scaffolding to developing a similar representation to numbers as well. Also, so there are some encouraging findings for number ordering training as well, although this was a non-significant trend. So then I guess the question arises: so if we had a chance to repeat this this training study, which one would be better to use? Should we use non-numerical or numerical training, or maybe a combination of the two? Also keeping in mind that although non-numerical ordering might be quite important at the very start of school education, maybe it's not as important for older children as well. So I think this is an interesting consideration for a future study. Yeah, and also just thinking about the potential mechanism of transfer. So why this training could be useful for maths development. I guess if it was the number ordering training that was successful, we could say, wow, this training might improve the fluency of retrieval of number word and number symbol connections, and also maybe the relations between numbers. But because it was actually the temporal ordering training that was the most efficient, maybe the main point is that children learn to pay more attention to ordinal relations, and it can be useful for performing some maths tasks. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your attention, and I don't know if somebody has any questions. Oh, sorry, I just start my video.
Okay, thank you, Kinga. Are there any questions? I think you are still sharing your screen because I see myself on your screen now.
Okay, sorry. What do I do? Okay.
Yeah, perfect. I see no hands immediately, so I think everything was pretty clear to everybody. I also see that despite my my intentions to really end in time, that we already have 15 minutes, or that we are already 15 minutes in overtime, but nevertheless, I think it was very interesting. Thank you to all four presenters for your presentations, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And what I even hope more is that we can all see each other in person in June in Belgium, I would say. Let's hope we can do an MCLS meeting on site this time. Okay, thank you again, and hope to see you later.
Thank you, Bert and Francesco, for organizing.